The chainsaw roared to life in my grip, its deafening growl tearing through the stillness of dawn like a war cry. Sparks shot out as the first thick power line snapped free, whipping wildly through the air like an angry serpent. I barely flinched. The HOA board members stood frozen at the boundary of my land, their smug confidence crumbling into panic. I could hear them yelling, but I didn't stop. They had crossed the line, literally. They had trespassed on my property, driven steel into my soil, and hung illegal power lines without so much as a courtesy knock. Now, they were about to learn what real consequences looked like. But this war didn't start today. No, it kicked off 3 days earlier when my best friend, Carl, woke me up far earlier than any sane person should be calling. I was on my porch, sipping black coffee and enjoying the quiet serenity of my land. 5 acres of peace, space, and blessed freedom from suburban nonsense. I moved out here specifically to get away from HOAs and their petty rules. Apparently, they hadn't gotten the memo. "Hey, Matt," Carl said, his voice somewhere between amusement and bewilderment. "You know there's a power pole in your backyard?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "What? You should come see this." 5 minutes later, I was standing at the northern edge of my property, staring at a monstrosity that hadn't been there the day before. A massive steel pole had been drilled deep into my ground. Heavy cables stretched taut from it across my land, humming faintly in the morning air. There was even an obnoxiously bright orange flag attached to it, fluttering in the breeze, labeled Community Energy Line, HOA Installation. I took a slow breath, fighting the sudden spike in my blood pressure. Technically, I didn't live inside their stupid little subdivision. My land sat just outside their jurisdiction. That hadn't stopped them over the years from trying to pull me in. Fines for excessive grass length, letters about my unsightly tool shed, even a warning about my dog. Brutus, looking aggressive. He's a golden retriever, by the way. But this was something else entirely. As I stood there, fuming, a golf cart came bouncing up the dirt path toward me. The driver was a thin, wiry man wearing a salmon-colored polo, khakis, and an arrogant grin. The kind of guy who probably practiced smiling in the mirror before HOA meetings. "Good morning, neighbor," he called out, hopping out of the cart with way too much enthusiasm. I folded my arms. "Who are you?" He approached me like he was about to close a real estate deal. "Apologies. Name's Thomas Granger, president of the Fairview Hills HOA. I assume you've noticed the new addition?" He gestured grandly at the pole, as if unveiling a piece of modern art. "Beautiful work, isn't it?" I stared at him. "You put power lines on my land without asking." Thomas waved a hand dismissively. "Well, technically, it's for the benefit of the entire community. These new lines are going to improve grid efficiency for everyone. I'm sure you understand." "Oh, I understand," I said, voice tight. "You stole my land." His smile faltered. Now, let's not be dramatic. It's just a small section. You have so much space, we figured." "You figure wrong." Thomas chuckled, like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Listen, things like this happen all the time. It's not a big deal. Do you really want to cause trouble over a few wires?" I clenched my jaw. "Trouble? You mean like trespassing? Illegal construction? Property damage?" He sighed, exasperated, as if I was the unreasonable one here. "Come on, be reasonable. What are you going to do? Sue us?" His condescension was the last nail in the coffin. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked back to my house, ignoring his smug laughter trailing behind me. At my desk, I fired up my laptop and started researching. An hour later, I had everything I needed. The HOA had screwed up royally. I called my lawyer, an iron-willed woman named Julia Bennett, who had helped me close on the land years ago. I laid out the situation. There was a long pause. "They did what?" she asked. "They installed power lines on my land. No notice. No easement." "Jesus," she muttered. "They're in serious violation of property laws. You could sue for damages, forced removal, possibly punitive." Or, I interrupted, an idea already taking shape. "Could I just cut them down?" There was a pause on the line. "Technically, yes. If they're trespassing without legal right, you can remove their infrastructure." That was all I needed to hear. The next morning, I rented a team and some industrial equipment. Carl showed up too, coffee in one hand and a box of donuts in the other. His face lit up when he saw the chainsaw in mine. "You're really doing this?" he asked. "They didn't ask permission putting it up," I said, rolling my shoulders. "I'm not asking permission taking it down." He shook his head with a grin. "God, I love this country." The first cut felt incredible. The thick cables snapped free with a violent recoil. I moved methodically down the line, cutting them one by one as the crew started dismantling the metal poles. It didn't take long for the HOA to catch wind. Halfway through, they came storming onto my land like a horde of angry suburbanites. Thomas led the charge, face red and sweaty. "What the hell are you doing?" he screamed. I wiped sweat from my brow. "Fixing your mistake." "You can't do this," he shrieked. "You're cutting off power to the entire neighborhood." I smiled. "Not my problem. You'll be fined. You'll be sued." I calmly pulled out my phone and showed him the documents Julia had sent. "Nope. You're trespassing. And I've already filed a potential lawsuit." The realization dawned on him slowly, like he was watching his house burn down and only just now realized what fire was. He sputtered, but had nothing left. I turned back to the last power line. With one final rev of the chainsaw, I sliced it clean. The entire neighborhood went dark. Silence followed, broken only by Carl's poorly suppressed laughter. And that was just the beginning. Thomas looked like he might have a stroke. His face was a fascinating mix of rage and disbelief. An older woman from the HOA crowd pointed at me, finger shaking. "You can't do that," she screeched. "You've cut off power for everyone." I shrugged. "Sure can. This is my land. Your lines were trespassing." Thomas finally found his voice. You don't know what you've done. This is illegal. We'll have you arrested." I tilted my head, amused. "Really?" "Because my lawyer says otherwise." I showed them the screenshots Julia had sent, state laws, court cases, and proof the HOA had no rights here. "Want me to read the law to you?" The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. The HOA, long untouchable, was cracking. Thomas clenched his fists and stormed off, muttering, "This isn't over." I grinned, looking forward to it. The next day, I wasn't surprised to find a letter taped to my door. Official HOA stationery. They were fining me $25,000 for damaging community infrastructure. I laughed, so hard Carl had to steady me. "They're nuts," he said, reading over my shoulder. "You don't even live in their neighborhood." "Exactly." I shook my head. "They have no authority over me." "So what's next?" I'd already made a few calls. The HOA had illegally installed infrastructure on my land. That meant they'd been profiting off me without permission. Time to make sure they never did it again. I asked Julia if I could sell access rights to a private company. "Absolutely," she said. "You control access. And if the HOA wants power back, they'll have to pay whoever owns those rights." "Perfect." I contacted a small private energy company. Explained the situation. They were more than eager. Not only would they pay me up front, they'd charge the HOA premium rates for access. I signed the deal that afternoon. When Thomas found out, he showed up on my doorstep, furious. "You can't do this." "Pretty sure I can," I said, sipping my coffee. "You're holding the whole community hostage." "I'm exercising my rights. You should understand that. The community's suffering because of you." I raised an eyebrow. "No, they're suffering because of your arrogance." He clenched his jaw so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. He had nothing left. The HOA scrambled. They tried to negotiate with the power company. No dice. Business was business. They called the city, claimed I interfered with public infrastructure. Julia crushed them with the property deeds. I caught 2 HOA members sneaking onto my land late at night, trying to reconnect the lines. I flipped on the floodlights and stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand. "Evening, gentlemen," I said casually. "Care to explain why you're trespassing?" They bolted. I sent the footage to Julia, who forwarded it to the city inspector. The HOA got slapped with fines for tampering. Thomas was unraveling. And the neighborhood? They were furious. Residents started digging into HOA finances. Turns out Thomas and his cronies had been skimming dues for years. Luxury vacations, golf trips, fancy office furniture. Once it was public, it was over. Carl showed up one afternoon, phone in hand. "You'll love this," he said. The HOA was finished. Emergency votes. Lawsuits. Thomas tried to blame me, but no one was buying it. The city audited them. Fraud, mismanagement, illegal projects. Game over. A week later, Julia called. "The HOA's disbanded," she said. "They voted to dissolve it entirely." I laughed. "Didn't take long. They want you on the new community board." "Not a chance." She laughed. "Didn't think so. I have my land, my freedom, and now, passive income from the energy deal." Every time the payment hit my account, I smiled. Carl and some friends came over for a barbecue to celebrate. We sat in my backyard, grilling, laughing, and enjoying the fact no HOA member could say a damn thing. Carl raised his beer. "This is one of those stories you read online. Except you actually lived it." I chuckled. "And the best part? I didn't break a single law." One of the guys grinned. "Bet Thomas is still fuming." "Oh, he is," I said. Saw him at the gas station. He couldn't even look at me. As the sun set, casting golden light over my land, I sat back in my chair and smiled. I'd fought for what was mine. I'd won, and I had peace. Carl nudged me. "So, free power now." I smirked. "I could, but I like my profits." He groaned. "You're ruthless." I stretched, feeling the weight of victory settle. "Lesson learned," I said. "Never mess with a man and his land."